In the grand halls of Astoria Palace, where every whisper could topple a kingdom and every secret could destroy a dynasty, 13-year-old Princess Isabella Marina discovers that the people sworn to protect her family may be the very ones plotting their downfall. When a seemingly innocent walk through the palace corridors leads to a shocking discovery, the young princess must navigate a web of betrayal, loyalty, and danger that threatens everything she holds dear. What started as curiosity about strange late-night meetings would soon uncover a conspiracy that reaches the highest levels of the royal household, forcing Isabella to make choices that could save or doom the crown of Astoria forever. The morning mist clung to the ancient stone walls of Astoria Palace like secrets refusing to be revealed. Princess Isabella Marina pressed her face against the cool window glass of her chamber, watching the groundskeepers tend to the rose gardens below. At 13, she possessed the curious nature that often got royal children into trouble, combined with an intelligence that made her observations particularly dangerous to those who preferred shadows to sunlight. Isabella had always been different from what the royal tutors expected. Where they wanted compliance, she offered questions. Where they sought silence, she provided commentary. Her parents, King Alexander and Queen Victoria, often exchanged worried glances during formal dinners when their youngest daughter would ask visiting dignitaries about topics that made even seasoned diplomats uncomfortable. But it was precisely this nature that would serve her well in the coming days, though she could never have imagined it that quiet Tuesday morning. The palace had felt different lately. Isabella couldn't quite put her finger on what had changed, but there was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to flow through the corridors like an invisible stream. Servants who had worked in the palace for decades were whispering in corners, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever she approached. Her older brother, Prince Marcus, had been spending more time in serious discussions with their father, meetings from which Isabella was pointedly excluded. Even her personal guard, Captain Sarah Thornfield, seemed more alert than usual, her eyes constantly scanning their surroundings during what should have been routine walks through the palace. It was during one of these walks that Isabella first noticed Edmund Blackwater. The man wasn't new to the palace staff, but he had recently been promoted to a position that gave him access to areas of the palace that had previously been off-limits to him. Blackwater served as an aide to the Lord Chamberlain, a position that required him to coordinate between various departments, and often brought him into contact with sensitive information about the royal family's schedule and activities. Isabella first became suspicious of Blackwater during a formal state dinner the previous week. She had been seated at the children's table, a position that annoyed her greatly, but provided an excellent vantage point for observing the adult proceedings. While the adults engaged in diplomatic conversations about trade agreements and international relations, Isabella watched Blackwater move through the room with practiced efficiency. But there was something about his movements that caught her attention. Unlike other staff members who focused solely on their immediate duties, Blackwater's eyes were constantly moving, taking in conversations that weren't meant for his ears, lingering near groups of officials when his duties didn't require his presence. What made Isabella particularly suspicious was an incident she witnessed near the end of the evening. As the guests began to disperse, she noticed Blackwater approaching a group that included her father's most trusted advisor, Lord Hamilton, and the Minister of Defense. The adults were engaged in what appeared to be a serious discussion about military installations along the kingdom's border. Blackwater had no legitimate reason to be near this conversation, yet he managed to position himself just close enough to overhear while appearing to tend to nearby, serving duties. The young princess made a mental note of this behavior and began paying closer attention to Blackwater's activities over the following days. What she discovered made her increasingly uncomfortable. The aide seemed to have an uncanny ability to appear wherever important conversations were taking place. During a meeting between her mother and the heads of various charitable organizations, Isabella spotted Blackwater lingering in the hallway just outside the partially open door. When foreign diplomats arrived for a series of meetings about a potential alliance, Blackwater somehow found reasons to be present in adjacent rooms or corridors. Isabella's suspicions reached a new level when she overheard a conversation between two senior palace guards. They were discussing increased security measures, mentioning concerns about information leaks that had occurred over the past several months. According to the guards, details about the royal family's private schedule had somehow reached unauthorized individuals, leading to security breaches that could have resulted in serious threats to the family's safety. The more Isabella thought about it, the more convinced she became that Blackwater was involved in these information leaks. But proving it would require more than observation. She needed evidence, something concrete that could be presented to the appropriate authorities. The challenge was that accusing a palace employee without solid proof could have serious consequences, not just for her, but for her entire family. False accusations could damage the palace's carefully maintained relationships with its staff and create an atmosphere of mistrust that would be difficult to overcome. Isabella decided that her best course of action was to document Blackwater's suspicious activities. She began carrying a small notebook, carefully recording times, locations, and circumstances whenever she observed behavior that seemed inappropriate. She noted when he appeared near sensitive conversations, when he lingered in areas where his duties didn't require his presence, and when he seemed to be paying particularly close attention to information that should have been confidential. The breakthrough came during a particularly important week when several foreign dignitaries were visiting the palace for crucial negotiations about international trade agreements. Isabella noticed that Blackwater's behavior became even more pronounced during this period. He seemed to be everywhere, always managing to position himself where he could overhear important discussions. But more importantly, she began to notice that he was carrying a device she hadn't seen before. The device was small and discreet, something that could easily be concealed in a pocket or jacket. Isabella first glimpsed it when Blackwater was adjusting his jacket near a group of officials discussing sensitive economic policies. The brief flash of metal and electronic components was enough to raise serious alarm bells in her mind. If Blackwater was carrying recording equipment, it would explain how he was able to capture and potentially share information from conversations he overheard. Isabella realized that she was potentially dealing with something much more serious than simple eavesdropping. If Blackwater was recording conversations involving state secrets, national security information, or sensitive diplomatic discussions, the implications could be enormous. Such recordings in the wrong hands could compromise ongoing negotiations, reveal state secrets to foreign powers, or even put the royal family's safety at risk. The young princess found herself facing a dilemma that would challenge her in ways she had never experienced before. She had potentially uncovered a serious threat to her family and her kingdom, but she was just 13 years old with limited power and influence within the palace hierarchy. She couldn't simply walk into her father's office and present her suspicions without risking being dismissed as an imaginative child with too much time on her hands. Isabella spent several sleepless nights considering her options. She could approach Captain Thornfield, who had always been supportive and protective, but even the captain might find it difficult to take action based solely on a young princess's observations. She could try to speak directly with her parents, but they were completely occupied with the important negotiations taking place and might not have time to properly investigate her concerns. As she wrestled with these decisions, Isabella became more determined to gather concrete evidence of Blackwater's activities. She began following him more systematically, careful to maintain a safe distance and avoid arousing his suspicion. She studied his patterns, learning his routines, and identifying the times and places where he was most likely to engage in suspicious behavior. What Isabella discovered during this surveillance period was both fascinating and terrifying. Blackwater had developed sophisticated methods for positioning himself near important conversations while maintaining plausible reasons for his presence. He had studied the palace layout extensively, identifying acoustic sweet spots where conversations from nearby rooms could be easily overheard. He had also cultivated relationships with other staff members that gave him legitimate reasons to be present in various areas of the palace at different times. But most importantly, Isabella confirmed that Blackwater was indeed carrying recording equipment. During a particularly crucial meeting between her father and military advisors, she managed to position herself where she could observe Blackwater's activities without being detected. She watched as he activated the small device and positioned it to capture the conversation taking place in the adjacent room. The moment of confirmation was both thrilling and terrifying for Isabella. She finally had proof of what she had suspected, but she also realized the full gravity of the situation. Blackwater wasn't just eavesdropping. He was systematically recording sensitive conversations that could compromise national security if they fell into the wrong hands. Isabella knew that she could no longer handle this situation alone. The evidence she had gathered was too important, and the potential consequences too serious for her to continue operating independently. But she also realized that approaching the wrong person could be dangerous. If Blackwater had accomplices within the palace staff, revealing her discoveries to the wrong individual could put her in serious danger and potentially compromise any investigation into his activities. The young princess decided that her best course of action was to approach Captain Thornfield, despite her earlier reservations. The captain had served the royal family faithfully for years and had demonstrated unwavering loyalty and competence. If anyone could be trusted with this sensitive information and would know how to proceed appropriately, it was Captain Thornfield. As Isabella prepared to share her discoveries with the captain, she reflected on how much her life had changed in just a few short weeks. She had gone from being a typical royal teenager, concerned primarily with her studies and social activities, to someone who had uncovered a potentially serious threat to her family and kingdom. The weight of responsibility was enormous, but she felt confident that she had made the right decisions and gathered the evidence necessary to address the situation properly. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test not only Isabella's courage, but also the loyalty and competence of those sworn to protect the royal family. Part 2. Captain Sarah Thornfield listened to Princess Isabella's account with the practiced attention of a security professional who had spent 15 years protecting the royal family. The captain's office, located in a secure wing of the palace that housed the royal protection detail, provided the privacy necessary for such a sensitive conversation. As Isabella presented her observations and evidence, Thornfield found herself both impressed by the young princess's thoroughness and deeply concerned about the implications of what she was hearing. Thornfield had noticed some of the same irregularities that Isabella described, but she had attributed them to the general heightened tension surrounding the important diplomatic negotiations taking place. The captain prided herself on her ability to assess potential threats, and the fact that a 13-year-old princess had identified something she had missed was both humbling and alarming. It suggested that the threat might be more sophisticated and well-concealed than typical security concerns. After Isabella finished her presentation, Captain Thornfield sat in thoughtful silence for several minutes, processing the information and considering the appropriate response. The accusations against Edmund Blackwater were serious and, if proven true, represented a significant security breach that could have far-reaching consequences. But proceeding without proper caution could also have serious ramifications, particularly if the allegations were somehow mistaken or if Blackwater had allies within the palace staff. Thornfield decided that the situation required immediate but careful action. She would need to verify Isabella's observations while simultaneously ensuring that Blackwater was prevented from continuing any harmful activities. This would require a delicate balance between investigation and prevention, conducted with the utmost discretion to avoid alerting potential accomplices or causing unnecessary disruption to the ongoing diplomatic proceedings. The captain's first step was to review recent security reports and incident logs to see if there were any patterns that might corroborate Isabella's observations. What she found was troubling. Over the past several months, there had been a series of minor security incidents that, when viewed together, suggested someone with inside knowledge was providing information to unauthorized parties. Foreign journalists had shown up at locations where the royal family was supposed to be making unannounced visits. Protesters had appeared at events that were supposed to be confidential until the last minute. Security sweeps had discovered evidence of surveillance equipment in areas where sensitive meetings had taken place. Each incident individually could be explained as coincidence or the result of information gathered through legitimate channels. But, taken together, they painted a picture of systematic information gathering that suggested someone with access to palace communications and scheduling was sharing that information with outside parties. Captain Thornfield decided that she needed to observe Blackwater's activities firsthand before taking any direct action. She began conducting discreet surveillance, using her position and security clearance to monitor his movements without arousing suspicion. What she discovered confirmed Isabella's observations and added new layers of concern about the scope of Blackwater's activities. The Aide was indeed carrying sophisticated recording equipment, but Thornfield's professional assessment revealed that the device was far more advanced than anything that would be available to a casual eavesdropper. The equipment appeared to be professional-grade surveillance technology, the type typically used by intelligence agencies or criminal organizations engaged in corporate espionage. This suggested that Blackwater was either working for a well-funded organization or had access to resources that went far beyond what a palace aide should possess. More concerning was Thornfield's discovery that Blackwater had been making unauthorized copies of palace security schedules and maintenance records. Using her access to administrative systems, the captain found evidence that Blackwater had been accessing files that were well outside his official responsibilities. He had downloaded information about guard rotations, building layouts, communication systems, and emergency protocols. This information would be invaluable to anyone planning an operation against the palace or the royal family. Captain Thornfield realized that the situation was far more serious than either she or Isabella had initially suspected. Blackwater wasn't just eavesdropping on conversations. He was systematically gathering intelligence that could be used to compromise palace security in fundamental ways. The potential for this information to be used in planning an attack or infiltration operation was enormous. The captain faced a critical decision about how to proceed. Her instinct was to have Blackwater arrested immediately and his activities investigated thoroughly. But doing so might alert other members of a potential conspiracy and cause them to destroy evidence or flee before they could be identified and apprehended. On the other hand, allowing Blackwater to continue his activities, even under surveillance, posed serious risks to the royal family's safety. After careful consideration, Thornfield decided on a strategy that would allow her to gather more information about the scope of Blackwater's operation while minimizing the immediate risks. She would increase security measures throughout the palace without making it obvious that Blackwater was under suspicion. This would involve rotating guard schedules, implementing additional communication security protocols, and conducting more frequent security sweeps to detect any surveillance equipment. Simultaneously, she would work with the palace's intelligence liaison to investigate Blackwater's background more thoroughly. Initial checks had revealed nothing suspicious, but those investigations had been routine employment screenings rather than the detailed background investigations typically conducted for individuals with access to sensitive information. Captain Thornfield also decided to bring Princess Isabella more directly into the investigation, despite some concerns about involving a minor in such a serious security matter. Isabella's observations had been crucial in identifying the threat, and her unique position within the palace gave her access to information and opportunities that might not be available to adult investigators. With proper guidance and protection, she could continue to serve as a valuable asset in gathering intelligence about Blackwater's activities. The captain explained her strategy to Isabella, emphasizing the importance of maintaining absolute secrecy about the investigation. She provided the princess with specific instructions about how to continue observing Blackwater without arousing his suspicion, and established protocol for reporting new information quickly and securely. Over the following week, Isabella and Captain Thornfield worked together to build a comprehensive picture of Blackwater's activities and potential connections. Their investigation revealed that his suspicious behavior extended far beyond what either of them had initially observed. He was maintaining contact with individuals outside the palace who had no legitimate connection to his work, using communication methods that were designed to avoid detection by standard security monitoring. The breakthrough in their investigation came when Isabella observed Blackwater meeting with an unidentified individual in a secluded area of the palace grounds. The meeting took place during a shift change when security coverage was reduced, and both participants took obvious precautions to avoid being seen or overheard. Isabella was only able to observe the meeting from a distance, but she noted that Blackwater appeared to transfer something to the other individual, possibly documents or recording devices containing the information he had gathered. When Isabella reported this meeting to Captain Thornfield, the captain realized that they were dealing with an active intelligence operation rather than simple information gathering. The systematic nature of Blackwater's activities, the sophisticated equipment he was using, and his connections to outside contacts all suggested that he was working as part of an organized effort to gather intelligence about the royal family and the kingdom's government. Captain Thornfield knew that she could no longer handle the situation through palace security channels alone. The scope of the potential conspiracy and the sophistication of the operation required involvement from the kingdom's national intelligence services. She contacted her liaison with the Royal Intelligence Service and requested an immediate briefing on the situation they had uncovered. The intelligence service's response was swift and serious. Within hours of Thornfield's report, a team of experienced investigators arrived at the palace to take over the case. But rather than immediately arresting Blackwater, they decided to continue surveillance in an attempt to identify all members of his network and understand the full scope of the operation. This decision created new challenges for Isabella and Captain Thornfield. They were now part of an active intelligence operation that required them to continue their normal routines while covertly supporting a complex investigation. For Isabella, this meant continuing to attend her regular classes and activities while remaining alert for any new information about Blackwater's activities. For Captain Thornfield, it meant maintaining the appearance of normal security operations while coordinating with intelligence operatives who were working to uncover a potential conspiracy against the crown. The investigation revealed that Blackwater's operation was indeed part of a larger conspiracy involving multiple individuals both inside and outside the palace. The intelligence service identified communications between Blackwater and agents of a foreign power that had been seeking detailed information about the kingdom's military capabilities, economic policies, and diplomatic strategies. The information Blackwater had been gathering was being used to give this foreign power significant advantages in ongoing negotiations and strategic planning. More immediately concerning was evidence that the conspiracy included plans for more direct action against the royal family. Communications intercepted by the intelligence service suggested that the information gathering phase of the operation was intended to support a more aggressive action that could potentially threaten the physical safety of the royal family members. As the investigation progressed, Captain Thornfield and the intelligence operatives realized that they were facing a critical decision point. Continuing surveillance might reveal additional members of the conspiracy, but it also meant allowing Blackwater to continue gathering sensitive information that could be used to harm the royal family. The risk-benefit calculation was becoming increasingly difficult to justify. The decision was ultimately made when Princess Isabella observed Blackwater attempting to access areas of the palace that contained information about the royal family's emergency evacuation procedures. This represented a clear escalation in his activities and suggested that whatever operation was being planned might be imminent. Captain Thornfield immediately contacted the intelligence team and recommended that they move to apprehend Blackwater before he could gather any additional information or alert his co-conspirators. The stage was set for a confrontation that would test the security systems and personnel that had been put in place to protect the royal family. Part 3. The morning of the confrontation dawned gray and misty, with an autumn chill that seemed to seep through the ancient stones of Astoria Palace. Princess Isabella woke earlier than usual, her stomach tight with nervous anticipation. Today, according to the plan Captain Thornfield had shared with her, they would attempt to catch Edmund Blackwater in the act of recording sensitive conversations. The intelligence service had determined that a crucial meeting between her father and military advisors would provide the perfect opportunity to gather definitive evidence of Blackwater's treasonous activities. Isabella dressed carefully in her usual morning attire, knowing that appearing normal was crucial to the success of the operation. She had spent the previous evening reviewing the plan with Captain Thornfield, memorizing her role and the signals that would indicate when to take action. The weight of responsibility felt enormous on her young shoulders, but she was determined to see the conspiracy exposed and her family protected from whatever threat Blackwater and his associates represented. The meeting that would serve as their trap was scheduled to take place in the king's private study, a room located in the secure wing of the palace where the most sensitive government business was conducted. The room was chosen specifically because it was adjacent to a service corridor that Blackwater would have legitimate reasons to access as part of his duties, but which also contained excellent acoustic properties that would make it an attractive target for surveillance activities. Intelligence operatives had spent the previous night installing additional recording equipment throughout the area, devices so sophisticated that they could capture not only conversations, but also detect the activation and operation of any unauthorized recording devices. This would provide definitive proof of Blackwater's activities while also ensuring that sensitive government information discussed during the meeting would remain secure. Princess Isabella's role in the operation was to position herself in a location where she could observe Blackwater's approach to the meeting area and provide early warning if he arrived earlier than expected or seemed suspicious of the trap being set. She would be stationed in a small reading alcove that overlooked the service corridor, a position that provided excellent visibility while appearing perfectly natural for a princess who enjoyed spending time with books. As the morning progressed, Isabella made her way to her assigned position with practiced casualness, stopping to speak with various palace staff members and even spending a few minutes in conversation with her governess about her upcoming lessons. To any observer, she appeared to be following her normal routine, with no indication that she was participating in a complex security operation. The king's meeting was scheduled to begin at 10 o'clock, with military advisors arriving separately to discuss new intelligence about potential threats from neighboring kingdoms. The timing was perfect for the trap, as Blackwater's normal duties would require him to be in the area preparing refreshments and ensuring that the meeting space was properly arranged. As 9:30 approached, Isabella settled into her reading alcove with a book about the history of Astoria, a choice that would allow her to remain in position for an extended period without arousing suspicion. From her vantage point, she could see the entire length of the service corridor and had a clear view of the entrances to both the king's study and the adjacent preparation areas. Blackwater arrived precisely on schedule, carrying a tray of refreshments and wearing his usual expression of professional competence. Isabella watched carefully as he went through his normal routine of setting up the meeting space, but she noticed subtle differences in his behavior that suggested he was preparing for more than simple service duties. The aide moved with unusual precision, taking particular care in positioning furniture and ensuring that certain areas of the room were arranged in ways that would optimize acoustic conditions. He spent extra time adjusting the ventilation system, ostensibly to ensure proper air circulation, but actually creating the quiet environment that would be ideal for recording sensitive conversations. Most tellingly, Isabella observed Blackwater conducting a careful survey of the room and adjacent areas, checking for any changes in the usual setup that might indicate increased security measures. His movements were those of someone who was professionally trained in surveillance and counter-surveillance techniques, far beyond what would be expected of a palace aide with his official background and responsibilities. At precisely 9:50, the military advisors began arriving for their meeting with the king. Isabella watched as Blackwater positioned himself in the service corridor, ostensibly to ensure that the meeting proceeded without interruption, but actually placing himself in an optimal location for surveillance activities. She could see that he had activated some kind of device, though it was too small and well concealed for her to identify its specific nature from her observation position. The meeting began exactly on schedule, with King Alexander and his advisors discussing intelligence reports about military movements in neighboring kingdoms. The conversations were deliberately designed to include the type of sensitive information that would be extremely valuable to foreign intelligence services, providing irresistible bait for Blackwater's recording activities. Isabella maintained her position in the reading alcove, occasionally turning pages of her book to maintain the appearance of casual reading while keeping careful watch on Blackwater's activities. She could see that the aide was completely focused on the conversations taking place in the adjacent room, adjusting his position periodically to optimize his ability to capture the discussions. What Isabella didn't know was that intelligence operatives were monitoring Blackwater's activities from multiple concealed positions throughout the area. Their sophisticated surveillance equipment was not only tracking his movements, but also detecting and analyzing the electronic signatures from any recording devices he might be operating. Within minutes of the meeting's start, they had confirmed that Blackwater was indeed using professional-grade surveillance equipment to record the proceedings. The evidence-gathering phase of the operation continued for nearly an hour, with the king and his advisors conducting increasingly sensitive discussions designed to provide irrefutable proof of Blackwater's treasonous activities. The aide remained in position throughout this period, completely absorbed in his surveillance activities and apparently unaware that he was himself being monitored. The signal for action came when intelligence operatives detected Blackwater beginning to prepare for departure, indicating that he intended to conclude his recording session and potentially transfer the gathered information to his outside contacts. Captain Thornfield, who had been monitoring the operation from a concealed command post, gave the order to move to the active apprehension phase. Isabella's role at this critical moment was to continue appearing as a normal palace resident going about her daily routine, providing cover for the movement of security personnel into position around Blackwater. She closed her book with deliberate casualness and began walking toward the main corridor, a movement that would take her past Blackwater's position and allow her to confirm his exact location for the approaching security team. As Isabella approached the service corridor, she could see that Blackwater was indeed preparing to leave his surveillance position. The recording device was still active, but he was beginning to secure it for transport and appeared to be making final adjustments to ensure that he had captured all the information he needed. What happened next unfolded with the precision of a carefully choreographed operation. As Isabella walked past the entrance to the service corridor, she made eye contact with Blackwater for just a moment. The look of recognition and sudden suspicion that crossed his face told her that he had realized something was wrong. Blackwater's training and experience immediately told him that the situation had changed in a way that threatened his operation. The presence of the princess in an area where she normally wouldn't be, combined with subtle changes in the palace's routine that he had noticed throughout the morning, indicated that his activities might have been discovered. The aide's reaction was swift and professional. Rather than attempting to bluff his way through the situation or continue with his normal routine, he immediately began implementing what was clearly a pre-planned escape procedure. He secured his recording equipment and began moving toward an exit route that would take him away from the main palace corridors and toward areas where he might be able to evade capture. But the intelligence operatives had anticipated this possibility and had positioned personnel to block all potential escape routes. As Blackwater reached the first checkpoint in his planned escape route, he found himself confronted by two plainclothes security agents who identified themselves and ordered him to stop. The confrontation that followed was brief but tense. Blackwater initially attempted to maintain his cover, claiming that he was simply going about his normal duties and expressing confusion about why he was being detained. But when the security agents informed him that they had been monitoring his activities and had evidence of his surveillance operations, his demeanor changed dramatically. Rather than surrendering quietly, Blackwater made a desperate attempt to destroy the recording device he had been carrying. He pulled the device from his pocket and attempted to smash it against the stone floor, apparently hoping to prevent the intelligence services from accessing the information he had gathered. The attempt was unsuccessful, as one of the security agents was able to intervene and secure the device before Blackwater could damage it significantly. But The aide's willingness to risk physical confrontation rather than allow the device to be captured confirmed the importance of the information it contained and suggested that his activities were part of a larger operation with significant stakes. As additional security personnel arrived to assist with Blackwater's apprehension, Isabella found herself in the unique position of watching the conclusion of an operation that she had played a crucial role in initiating. The knowledge that her observations and investigation had led to the exposure of a serious threat to her family and kingdom was both satisfying and sobering. Captain Thornfield approached Isabella as the immediate crisis concluded, expressing both gratitude for her crucial contributions and relief that the operation had concluded successfully without anyone being injured. The captain explained that Blackwater would be taken into custody for extensive interrogation, and that the investigation would continue to identify any other members of his network who might still pose a threat. But even as they celebrated the successful conclusion of this phase of the operation, both Isabella and Captain Thornfield knew that their work was far from finished. The information gathered from Blackwater's device and the intelligence developed through the investigation would need to be analyzed thoroughly to understand the full scope of the conspiracy they had uncovered. Part 4 the interrogation of Edmund Blackwater took place in a secure facility operated by the Royal Intelligence Service, far from the palace where his activities had been discovered. Princess Isabella was not permitted to participate directly in the questioning, but Captain Thornfield kept her informed about the investigation's progress as new information was revealed about the conspiracy they had helped uncover. What emerged from Blackwater's interrogation was far more extensive and dangerous than anyone had initially suspected. The Aide had been working as part of a sophisticated intelligence network operated by the neighboring Kingdom of Aldoria, a nation that had been engaged in increasingly tense diplomatic relations with Historia over territorial and trade disputes. The information he had been gathering was being used to give Aldoria significant advantages in ongoing negotiations and to plan potential military operations against Historia. Blackwater's recording device contained hours of conversations involving the kingdom's most sensitive military and diplomatic secrets. The device had captured discussions about troop movements, defensive strategies, economic policies, and diplomatic positions that could have given Valdoria enormous advantages in any conflict. Even more concerning, the recordings included detailed information about the royal family security procedures and emergency protocols that could have been used to plan operations against the palace itself. The investigation revealed that Blackwater had been recruited by Valdorian intelligence services several years earlier, long before he had gained his position at the palace. His entire career advancement had been carefully orchestrated to place him in a position where he could access sensitive information about Astoria's government and royal family. The sophistication of the operation suggested that it was part of a long-term strategic plan rather than an opportunistic attempt to gather intelligence. More troubling was the discovery that Blackwater was not working alone within the palace. The intelligence service's analysis of his communications and activities revealed that he had at least 2 accomplices among the palace staff, individuals who had been providing him with information and assistance in his surveillance activities. These accomplices had helped him gain access to restricted areas, provided cover for his suspicious activities, and assisted in transmitting the information he gathered to his Valdorian handlers. Captain Thornfield found herself facing the uncomfortable reality that the palace's security had been comprehensively compromised by a well-organized and professionally executed intelligence operation. The fact that multiple staff members had been successfully recruited as foreign agents suggested serious vulnerabilities in the palace's hiring and security procedures that would need to be addressed immediately. Princess Isabella, despite her youth, found herself in the unique position of being consulted about the ongoing investigation and security improvements. Her observations had been crucial in identifying the conspiracy, and her detailed knowledge of palace routines and staff behavior made her a valuable resource in identifying other potential security vulnerabilities. The intelligence service's investigation expanded rapidly as they worked to identify all members of the Valdorian network and assess the full scope of the information that had been compromised. They discovered that the operation had been running for nearly 3 years, during which time Blackwater and his accomplices had gathered extensive intelligence about Astoria's military capabilities, diplomatic strategies, and royal family security procedures. The two other palace staff members who had been working with Blackwater were identified and apprehended within days of his arrest. Like Blackwater, they had been carefully recruited and positioned to maximize their access to sensitive information. One was a communications technician who had been intercepting and copying diplomatic messages, while the other was a maintenance worker who had been installing surveillance equipment in areas where sensitive meetings took place. The discovery of these additional conspirators led to a comprehensive security review of all palace personnel and procedures. The intelligence service conducted detailed background investigations of every staff member with access to sensitive areas or information, using techniques far more thorough than the standard employment screenings that had failed to identify the Valdorian agents. This security review revealed additional vulnerabilities that, while not necessarily compromised by the current conspiracy, could have been exploited by future intelligence operations. The palace's communication systems were upgraded with additional encryption and monitoring capabilities. Access control procedures were revised to limit staff members' ability to move freely through sensitive areas. New protocols were implemented for handling classified information and conducting sensitive meetings. Princess Isabella found her own routine significantly affected by these security improvements. Her movements throughout the palace were now more closely monitored, and she was required to follow new protocols when accessing certain areas or attending official functions. While she understood the necessity of these measures, she couldn't help but feel that some of the freedom and spontaneity that had characterized her childhood in the palace had been permanently lost. The broader implications of the Valdorian intelligence operation extended far beyond the palace itself. The information that had been compromised included details about Astoria's military deployments and strategic planning that could affect the kingdom's security for years to come. Diplomatic negotiations with multiple neighboring kingdoms had to be reassessed in light of the possibility that Astoria's positions and strategies had been known to opposing parties. King Alexander faced difficult decisions about how to respond to Valdoria's intelligence operation. The evidence of systematic espionage and the sophisticated nature of the conspiracy suggested that Valdoria had been preparing for potential military action against Astoria. But responding too aggressively could escalate tensions and potentially provoke the very conflict that the intelligence operation had been designed to support. The diplomatic response was carefully calibrated to demonstrate Astoria's awareness of the intelligence operation while avoiding actions that could be interpreted as aggressive or provocative. Valdorian diplomatic personnel were expelled from the kingdom, and formal protests were filed with international organizations about the violation of diplomatic norms. But military preparations were conducted discreetly to avoid giving Valdoria pretext for claiming that Astoria was preparing for aggressive action. Captain Thornfield's role in uncovering and stopping the intelligence operation earned her recognition and promotion within the royal security apparatus. But she was also tasked with the enormous responsibility of implementing the security improvements necessary to prevent future penetration of palace defenses. This included not only physical and electronic security measures, but also the challenging task of rebuilding trust and morale among palace staff members who felt betrayed by the discovery of traitors in their ranks. For Princess Isabella, the experience of uncovering and helping to stop the conspiracy had profound effects on her understanding of her role and responsibilities as a member of the royal family. She had learned that the privileges and protections of royal life came with serious obligations to protect the kingdom and its people from threats both obvious and hidden. The young princess found herself changed by the experience in ways that would affect her for the rest of her life. She had discovered that she possessed not only the observational skills necessary to identify complex threats, but also the courage and determination to take action when the situation required it. These qualities would serve her well in the years to come as she prepared to assume greater responsibilities within the kingdom. The resolution of the immediate crisis did not mean the end of vigilance against similar threats. The intelligence services continued monitoring for signs of other foreign intelligence operations, and the palace security apparatus remained at heightened alert levels. The sophistication of the Valdorian operation had demonstrated that Astoria faced threats that required constant attention and professional competence to detect and counter. Princess Isabella continued her education and royal duties with a new understanding of the complexities and dangers of the world beyond the palace walls. Her tutors incorporated lessons about international relations, intelligence operations, and security procedures into her curriculum, recognizing that her future role as a senior member of the royal family would require her to understand these issues thoroughly. The story of how a 13-year-old princess had helped uncover and stop a sophisticated foreign intelligence operation became a carefully guarded secret within the kingdom's security apparatus. While Isabella's contributions were recognized and appreciated by those who knew the full story, the sensitive nature of the operation and the ongoing security implications meant that her role could not be publicly acknowledged. Captain Thornfield often reflected on how different the outcome might have been if Princess Isabella had not possessed the curiosity and observational skills that led her to notice Blackwater's suspicious behavior. The intelligence operation had been sophisticated enough to evade detection by professional security personnel and might have continued indefinitely if not for the young princess's intervention. The experience strengthened the relationship between Isabella and Captain Thornfield, creating a bond based on shared experience of facing serious threats and working together to protect the royal family and kingdom. This relationship would prove valuable in future years as Isabella assumed greater responsibilities and faced new challenges related to her royal duties. The palace gradually returned to normal operations as the immediate security concerns were addressed and new procedures became routine. But the knowledge that their home had been penetrated by foreign agents and their most intimate conversations had been recorded and transmitted to potential enemies left a lasting impact on all members of the royal family. King Alexander and Queen Victoria found themselves more cautious in their discussions and more aware of the potential for their words and actions to be monitored by hostile forces. This awareness affected not only their official duties, but also their personal interactions, creating a subtle but persistent tension that reminded them constantly of the threats they faced. The successful resolution of the crisis also demonstrated the effectiveness of the kingdom's security apparatus when properly focused and supported. The cooperation between palace security, the intelligence services, and even an observant young princess had resulted in the rapid identification and neutralization of a serious threat. This success provided a model for future security operations and reinforced the importance of maintaining vigilance against sophisticated threats. As autumn turned to winter and life at the palace settled into new routines shaped by enhanced security procedures, Princess Isabella often thought about the chain of events that had transformed her from a curious teenager into someone who had played a crucial role in protecting her family and kingdom. The experience had taught her that even the most carefully protected environments could harbor dangerous secrets, and that vigilance and courage were essential qualities for anyone who sought to protect what they valued most. The secret recording device that Edmund Blackwater had carried would be analyzed extensively by intelligence experts. Its technology studied to understand how foreign services were conducting surveillance operations and how such devices might be detected in the future. But for Princess Isabella, the device represented something more personal, evidence that she had successfully identified and helped neutralize a threat to everything she held dear. The palace would never again seem quite as safe and secure as it had before the discovery of the conspiracy, but it was now better protected by people who understood the nature of the threats they faced and were prepared to meet them with professionalism, courage, and the determination to preserve the kingdom's security and independence against all who would seek to undermine them.